What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the channel. So I don't normally sit in front of the camera like this, but I did want to do an intro to today's video because I wanted to talk a little bit about my journey into radio and how I got to where I am, because I think that how I got here is probably similar to how a lot of you found this video. So I wasn't always a radio dork. I started out with radio kind of as a necessary evil. So I'm a fairly avid outdoorsman. I like to hike and kayak and mountain bike and camp. And I quite often have my family with me, my wife and my daughter. And we often find ourselves in places where there's no cell service. So I wanted a way that we could stay in touch with each other while we were out on a trail or, out in our kayaks in the middle of a lake, and I might be at one of the lake, they might be at the other. Or, I might go hiking while they stay back at camp. And so I bought a couple of just inexpensive bubble pack FRS radios. They were Motorola's. They weren't junk, but that's all I kind of knew, right? There was those little cheap bubble pack radios you buy at, sporting goods supply stores or Walmart or what have you, or there was ham radio. I didn't really realize there was anything else. So I bought those and we used them for a little while, but they weren't the greatest, right? Those little FRS radios, they've got these little dinky antennas on them. They're only half a watt. So the range is pretty atrocious. Quarter mile, maybe a half mile if it's across like flat, clear water. But not fantastic. They work, but they really didn't get the job done. And so, I was like, well, I guess this is what we've got. We're kind of stuck with it because, I'm not going to waste my time getting a ham radio license because A, I wasn't really interested in ham radio at the time. I didn't care about radio at all. And B, even if I got a ham radio license, my wife and my daughter couldn't use it, so it really wouldn't do any good. So one day I was watching a YouTube video, and I was watching a video from Grunt Proof. And Randall, he was talking about a girl he ran into. I was out in the mountains in California. I forget if she was lost or if she'd crashed. She was on a dirt bike, and she couldn't get a hold of her friends, and there was no cell service. And he said, she probably would have been okay or better off had, both she and her friends had some GMRS radios to talk on so that they could communicate even without cell service. I said, what the heck is GMRS? So I did a little Googling and found out what GMRS was. And then I started down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos on GMRS. And I found Not a Rubicon's channel. And I watched a lot of Randy's videos, learned a lot about the radios, and then went out and bought my first radio. Actually bought a couple of radios, one for me, one for my wife, one for my daughter. And, we use those we still do use GMRS when we're out doing outdoors things and there's no cell service. And that really fit the bill because, you can share your license with your family. We'll talk more about that when we get to the service and things like that. But it really fit that use case. So then it got me thinking about, well, what would happen if, the cellular network went down or there was a natural disaster, things like that? How would we be able to communicate? And, even with GMRS, unless you've got line of sight, you can't communicate. But there are repeaters. So I started down the rabbit hole of playing with repeaters and learned how all those worked. And that kind of led me into, okay, what do I do for beyond line of sight? And that's how I got into ham radio, and that's where we are today. But I wanted to talk about GMRS because I think GMRS fills a gap or a niche that no other radio service really does. And there are some reasons for that. And I think that for a lot of people, GMRS might be the solution for communications when you don't have cell service. Now, yes, there are things like, Garmin InReaches and Starlink and things like that, and they serve a purpose as well. But if you're just trying to stay in contact with a couple of people while you're out doing things and there's no cell service, it's a lot more convenient to carry a GMRS radio than it is to have to pull out your Garmin InReach and send a message up to a satellite and it takes a couple minutes for that to come back down, or carry a Starlink Mini around with you. I'm not doing that, right? I'm not throwing one of those on my backpack every time I'm out in the woods or on my kayak or whatever. So GMRS fills that hole in people's communication strategies that I think no other radio service really fills, and we'll talk about why when we get to the service. But I just wanted to give you a little bit of background as to how I got to where we are, so you understood where I was coming from when it came to how I use radio. And I'll be honest with you, aside from my hobby stuff, Parks in the Air, Summits in the Air, that kind of stuff, my GMRS radios get more use than any other radios I own. So with that being said, let me spin the camera around. We're going to take a look. I've got a document we're going to go over. I will link that in the description below. We'll take a look at some different radios. We'll talk about some pros and cons, what I like about certain radios, what I don't like about certain radios, things you might want to look for, antennas, all those kinds of things. So I'll be back in just a minute. Okay, folks, so we're back. So I've got a document here, and I will link this in the video description below. It just goes over some basic stuff, like what is GMRS, a little bit of the licensing, the different channels. We'll talk a little bit about radios, antennas, some pros, some cons, and who GMRS might be for. So what is GMRS? GMRS is the General Mobile Radio Service. So it's an FCC licensed service in the United States. Now there may be similar services in other countries. I honestly don't know. That operates roughly on the 70 centimeter ham band. So roughly, it's a little bit above. So it's 462 to 467 megahertz. I have a typo in here. I said 476. I got to change that. So when I post this document in the video description, that will be correct. So GMRS has a 5-watt power limit on handheld radios and a 50-watt power limit on mobile and base radios. They allow for removable and replaceable antennas. That is huge. So the handhelds are 5 watts instead of half a watt, right? So our FRS radios are half a watt. So these are 10 times more powerful for the handhelds. Oops, sorry about that. Didn't mean to bump the camera. And we can replace the antennas. So we can get rid of those stupid, dinky little antennas and put a real antenna on there. Like I said, mobile radios and base station radios can run up to 50 watts of power, all right? They can be front panel programmable. So if we look at one of these radios, all right, you will see that we have a full keypad, all right? And that keypad allows us to program the radio, okay? It also, and most importantly, allows for repeater use. Okay, so this is the only other service besides ham radio that allows us to use repeaters. And that's a big deal because repeaters are going to drastically increase our range, okay? The service uses the same 22 channels that are shared with FRS or the family radio service, as well as 8 repeater channels. Okay, so this uses the same channels as the bubble pack radios you would buy at Walmart or a sporting goods store or Target or what have you, or at Amazon. All right, well, let's talk about licensing for a minute. So GMRS does require a license. The license is $35 for 10 years, which is pretty reasonable. There's no exam. You don't have to take a test to get a GMRS license. It's just go on the FCC website, fill out the information, pay them $35, and they give you your license. Now, the FCC website, if you've never had to navigate the FCC website before, it is not great. Let's just say that. Not a Rubicon has a fantastic tutorial on his website that walks you through step by step. In fact, when I got my GMRS license, that's how I did it. This will be a live link in the document. It'll take you to his website where you can follow step by step to get your GMRS license. It's pretty straightforward, but like I said, the website can be a little convoluted. Now, one of the great things about GMRS, and one of the main reasons I was attracted to it, is the ability to share your license and your call sign with anyone in your family. So when I say anyone in your family, I'm not just talking wife, husband, children, brother, sister. I'm talking your whole family. Mom, dad, cousins, in-laws, children, grandchildren, whatever, okay? If they're in your family, for the most part, they're going to be covered under your license. There may be some exceptions. If you look on the Part 95 rules, it lays it out pretty specifically as to who can use your license. But pretty much anybody in your family can, which is the nice thing, all right? Because so for instance, I gave my brother-in-law a GMRS radio. In fact, I gave him a radio identical to this one right here, which we'll talk about in a minute. And he uses my call sign, all right, because he can do that. If we're going out and there's a whole pile of us with radios, a lot of times I'll have people use like designators. So they might be, I'm WRUE 675, so they might be WRUE 675/3 or whatever, okay? The thing with call signs is really the only time you hear anybody use a call sign is on repeaters. Now, according to the rules, every time you end transmission, you need to identify yourself with your call sign if you are using a GMRS radio, okay? If you're on an FRS radio, you don't need to. Now, obviously on a repeater, you're on a GMRS radio because they're the only things that will work on those repeaters. So if you're on a repeater, every time you finish your transmission, you want to identify yourself with your call sign. Simplex radio to radio, a lot of times you hear people not use them. I'm not telling you not to. I do whenever I'm on a GMRS radio and I'm working simplex. But a lot of people don't because realistically, nobody's going to know if you're on an FRS radio or a GMRS radio. Okay, that's just the reality of it. but I just wanted to lay that out there. According to the regulations, if you're on a GMRS radio, when you're at end of transmission or every 15 minutes in a conversation, you need to identify yourself, okay? Now, there are 22 simplex channels, okay? So you'll see that channels 1 through 7 are in the 462 megahertz range. You can run 5 watts max power, all right? And they are wide bandwidth. Channels 8 through 14 are in the 467 megahertz space. They're limited to half a watt power and narrow bandwidth. And then channels 15 through 22 are back down to 462 megahertz again. You can run up to 50 watts on those channels. And again, we're back up to our wide bandwidth. So 5 watts, half a watt, 50 watts, okay? There are also 8 repeater channels. So we've got repeaters channel 15 through 22. So we've got our receive frequency, which is going to be in the 462 megahertz space. Our transmit frequency, which is in our 467 megahertz space. Again, those repeater channels are 50 watts, wide bandwidth. Okay. Now, if you're running a 50 watt mobile rig to a repeater, most repeaters are like 20 watts, but they're way up on top of hills usually. You can get some range. If that repeater's up on top of a mountain, you can definitely on that kind of power work, 50, 60 miles. I'm not saying you're always going to get that range because again, you've got to be able to see the antennas. Remember, this is still line of sight. But if that repeater's up on top of a mountain and you can make it up there, that repeater will repeat you out over a wide area. So those repeaters give you a tremendous range boost. Okay. So that's something you really want to think about is those repeaters really give you a range extension. I'm going to bump the camera here real quick. I apologize. Now, one thing you do need to watch is that channels 19 and 21 can't be used north of line A and east of line C. So let me explain roughly what line A and C are. Line A is within, I forget how many miles of the Canadian border. It runs right across the northern part of the country. And line C, if I remember correctly, is like Alaska. All right. You can't use these channels north of line A or east of line C. There are treaties with Canada that regulate this stuff. And if you're too close to Canada, you can't use those frequencies. There are some other frequencies also in the ham radio space, but you don't need to worry about that. So like I live in upstate New York and I'm south of line A, but if I go north not very far, it puts me above line A and I can no longer use channels 19 to 21. You can use them on an FRS radio, but you can't use them on a GMRS radio. So just keep that in mind. Okay. And you can find maps online that'll show you where lines A and C are. There, in fact, there's a website that'll actually, you punch in a location, it'll tell you whether you're above or below line A, okay? Now let's talk about the radios for a minute. There are many radios available for GMRS. Most of them are relatively inexpensive, okay? Some are of dubious quality. So just like anything else, some of them are going to be pretty chintzy. On the low end, you're probably looking around 20 or 25 bucks. So for instance, this Baofeng, I think this is a GM15 Pro, if I remember correctly. These are, I think, 25 bucks, and this is a reasonably good radio. It's USB-C charging, USB-C. It's got a USB-C port on the battery, but here's the thing. This is a USB PD setup, so this is a USB, whoops, my cable's caught, hold on. This is a USB-C to USB-C charger, and you will see when I plug this in, the charging light does not come on, okay? Now, if I take a USB-A to USB-C, and plug it in. Now you'll see the charging light does come on. So while it's a USB-C port, it's not actually USB-C. You do have to have a C to A cable in order to charge this, but it is front panel programmable. It does have a replaceable antenna. We'll talk about antennas in a minute. And again, you got to remember that GMRS radios are locked to the GMRS channels. You cannot change this from those. You can receive on anything you want as long as it's within the receive range of the radio, but you can only transmit on the GMRS frequencies. Okay, so this is about a $25 radio, give or take. Like I said, some of these are fairly inexpensive. All right, they can go up as high as $250 or more for an HT for a good one. Mobile radios can be more expensive depending on what you buy. They don't need to be. There are mobile radios that are relatively inexpensive also. Keep in mind the low power channels, so channels 8 through 14, which are half a watt, may not be available on your mobile radio because that mobile radio may not be able to go low enough power-wise to transmit on those channels. So you may find that you don't see channels 8 to 14 on some of your mobile rigs, all right? Many of these radios will be front panel programmable. So when you look at these radios, you will see a keypad that I can program the radio from. Not all radios are going to have that ability, though. There are some that you will need software to program them. There are no buttons on the front other than channel up, down, menu stuff, okay? Note that not all GMRS radios will allow repeater use also. I've seen some that will only work simplex. I'm not sure why you would buy those, but they do exist. Another thing you want to consider is, to my knowledge, 100% of GMRS radios are manufactured in China. That is just the truth of the matter. Okay, even the best ones are going to be Chinese. If you have an aversion to Chinese radios, GMRS might not be for you, because you can't buy Japanese GMRS radios, or there are no US-made HTs even that I know of, regardless of manufacturer. Okay, any like UHF, VHF handheld transceivers. Now you can buy an LMR or ham radio from, let's say, one of the big Japanese companies, and Mars mod it and unlock it to use it on GMRS, and then you could have a Kenwood or an ICOM or a Yaesu or something. Just understand that that is not within the regulations. So Part 95 of GMRS, this tells you what radios you can use, okay? And those radios have to be Part 95 accepted in order to be able to be used on the GMRS frequencies according to the regulations, okay? It is possible to unlock them and use, if you had a Yaesu or something, you can unlock it and use it on GMRS. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm just telling you that it is possible to do, all right? But according to the regulations, the radio has to be Part 95 type accepted in order to be able to use it on GMRS. Now let's talk about some of the radios for a minute here. So I'll start with that Baofeng again. So this is, like I said, I think this is a GM15 Pro or 13 Pro, I forget. These are about $25 on Amazon. It's a decent radio. It's nothing to write home about, but they get the job done. Like I said, I gave one of these to my brother-in-law. Inexpensive kick-around radio. It does have the USB-C port, although, like I said, it doesn't really charge on Type-C. This was actually my first GMRS radio. This is a BTEC GMRS V2. Now, if you look at this, if you know anything about ham radios, this will look an awful lot like a Baofeng UV82 because it's the same radio. BTEC is, however, a United States company. So these radios, while they're manufactured by Baofeng in China, BTEC does all the programming on these, and BTEC radios have US customer service. So if that's something that you were really concerned about, is being able to call somebody or email somebody in the United States and get actual service from somebody in the United States, consider BTEC. Okay, now they have a whole range of radios. This is sort of their base radio. They have some really nice ones also. But BTEC might be somebody you want to consider as well. From there, we'll go up in price a little bit. Actually, not really. It's not really up in price. But these are about $65, someplace in that vicinity. Now, I've got two of these. This is a Radioddity GM30 Plus. I do not have a standard GM30. I've used them before. I do want to say right up front that Radioddity did send me these radios. They sent me two of them free of charge to take a look at. I will go over these radios in detail once I've used them more. I've used them a little bit, and so far I'm pretty impressed, but I want to say right up front, I did not pay for these. Radioddity sent me a pair of these. All right, so my wife and I are going to use these, and I'm going to talk about why I'm going to use these with my wife or my daughter here in a minute, because these contain a feature that the other radios I have here don't. All right, but these are nice. They've got a color screen. Understand with these color screens, however, sometimes in direct sunlight, they can be hard to see. These sort of old LCD monochrome screens are much easier to see in sunlight. All right. Most of these radios have the ability to do both FM radio, so we're not going to get much. All right, but they'll do FM radio. They will also do weather radio. All right. So they'll have the ability to do those also. Again, locked to our GMRS frequency, so I can't transmit on anything but GMRS. I can listen to other frequencies though. But the thing these radios have that the other ones I have here don't, if I go into the menu, you'll see these radios have GPS. And the cool thing about this is, if I turn the GPS on these radios and I turn it on both radios, all right, I can actually locate one radio with the other radio. It will show me distance and direction from this radio to this radio. which is cool because if my wife and I are both out in the woods and I'm trying to figure out where she is, she's like, hey, I'm over here, I walked down this trail, whatever. I can punch her GPS, I can pull up her GPS on this and I can see where she is. All right. So that's kind of cool that you can see, you know, positions from one station to another. So that's kind of neat. But again, like I said, I want to say right up front, I did not pay for these. These were sent to me. And you'll see these more. Like I said, I'm going to test these and see how these work. I do have some other radios coming as well that we'll take a look at, but I have these here now. This is a Woshin KGS-88G. This is the radio I use when I am kayaking because this is an IP67 water-resistant radio. None of the other radios here are. Oh, one thing I do want to mention about the Radioddity radios is they are USB-C, but they are actually USB-C. So if I grab my USB-C PD cable and I plug it in, you will see it's charging. Okay, so unlike the Baofeng, which you needed a Type A, a Type C cable, this will type on USB PD, so it'll Type C to Type C charge. So they're actual Type C, okay? This guy will do Type C as well. It's under this door right here, but it's sealed off. You actually have to use a little screwdriver to take it off to get into that because, again, it is IP67. This is a really nice radio. These Woshin radios are super heterodyne receivers, so they receive really well. This is a very small radio, so if you look at this in comparison to, say, this Radioddity or this B-Tech, you can see how much smaller this Woshin is. It's a very small radio. So this is my kayaking radio. Anytime I'm going to be out in the rain or the kayak or anything, this is the radio I bring with me. Now this will not receive FM radio or weather or anything like that because this is only 70 centimeters. So this will receive on 70 centimeter, but it will not receive broadcast FM, no weather radio, anything like that. This is strictly a GMRS radio, so that is something you need to consider. The last radio I have here is another Woshin. This is my KGUV9G Pro, or Plus, I forget which one. So this radio, again, color screen. This is a super heterodyne receiver again. This is a really, really nice radio. This one has a Type-C battery on it, but again, the problem with this one, if I remember correctly, is just like the Baofeng. Right, we plug that in and it doesn't charge. If I plug it into a to C, it charges. Okay, so the only radios I have here that actually, sorry, I didn't mean to bump the camera, that actually do Type-C charging are the Radioddity GM30 Pluses, okay? But this is a really nice radio. You know, this is probably the nicest receiver of any of the GMRS radios I own. This is also the most expensive radio, right? So like, that's like $25. That's like 60 something bucks. I think a pair of these are like 70, but don't quote me on that. I'd have to look. This guy's about 140. That guy's about 100 and I think when I bought it, it was like 170 something. I think they're like 150 bucks now, but I could be wrong. It's someplace in that general vicinity, 150 to 175 bucks. So this is the most expensive radio here, but it does have the best receiver. It does have the most features. All right, but there are a lot of different options out there when it comes to radios. You know, you're gonna find a radio that's gonna fit your needs and your budget, depending on how much you want to spend and what you want that radio to do. You will find a radio out there that will do what you want it to do for the price point that you want. Again, if you want, I do have a Baofeng, what is it? I forget, it's there. The Baofeng has a water resistant, like an IP67 GMRS radio too. The reason it's not on the table is it doesn't work because my wife dropped it in the water in her kayak and it stopped working, even though it's supposed to be an IP67 radio. So I'm not going to recommend that radio. All right. Like I said, if you want one that you know you can get wet, this thing's been in the water. This has gone swimming before. This Woshin KGS-88G, if you want one that can get wet, this is probably the guy for you. Okay. So you've got a lot of options when it comes to handheld radios. I do not have a mobile GMRS radio. In fact, I don't have a mobile ham radio either. I have HTs, and then for ham radio, I have my big, my little field radios and my base station rig. So you got a lot of options when it comes to radios. Let's talk a little bit about antennas, because we talked about antennas in a previous video, and I said that probably the most important part isn't the radio, it's the antenna. Antenna quality varies wildly. All right, most stock rubber ducks are just dual band ham antennas. So like if I pull one of these antennas off of here, and I look at the bottom, I don't know if you're gonna be able to see this, get some light on it. All right, this particular one says FM 136 to 174 and 400 to 520 megahertz. So this is a dual band ham radio antenna. This is not a GMRS antenna. And that is something you need to understand, that a lot of these radios ship with ham radio antennas on them. Now, they work, but they're not great. Okay, they're not tuned for the portion of the band that we're using. They're tuned for a lower frequency, like 420 to 450 megahertz. Okay, they don't work as well at 460 or 470 megahertz. So when you buy antennas, I would recommend you get antennas that are actually GMRS antennas. All right, so like for instance, this Nagoya on this Baofeng here, this is a 701G. This is a GMRS antenna, and you'll see it's tuned at 462 megahertz right there. Okay, this is a legit GMRS antenna. All right, if I take this is the stock rubber duck on this KGS88G, and if I take that off, on the bottom, it says 462 to 467 megahertz. This is a GMRS antenna. This is not a ham radio antenna. Okay. On this other Woshin, I have my Smiley 5/8 wave GMRS. This is a 465 megahertz antenna, which is right in between 462 and 467. Okay, so that is a legit GMRS antenna. On this Radioddity GM30 Plus, again, I've got a Smiley. This is their little stubby. Okay, I have several of these. I really like these for hiking and whatnot. Okay, but again, legit GMRS antenna. Right, I've got this Abri 771 GMRS antenna, and again, this is a legitimate GMRS antenna, and you can see how long this guy is. This is a long range antenna. This probably gives me the most range out of all these antennas. The only antenna that probably works pretty much as well is this Smiley 5/8 wave. Okay, so again, antenna is going to be huge. The radio is important, the antenna is probably more important. So when you spend the money and buy a decent antenna. Now let's talk about some pros and cons. So pros, the license is cheap, right? It's $35 for 10 years. It's $3.50 a year. I mean, that's nothing, all right? And it can be shared with your whole family. There's lots of radios to choose from to fit your needs, your budget, your use case, all of those kinds of things. UHF, which is what these operate on, work well in urban areas and suburban areas and inside buildings. It can be used for commercial uses as well, so you can use GMRS for business use. All right. They allow the use of repeaters. Again, this is the only other radio service in the United States that allows repeater use. It allows base stations and mobile rigs as well. The frequencies are interoperable with FRS radios. So if you have a GMRS radio, but you want to give your buddies radios that they can use and they don't have GMRS licenses, you hand them just those cheap FRS radios and they're interoperable. They all work on these same 22 channels. Okay. Now, cons. Lack of truly high-end radios. There are no really high-end radios. Like I said, these Woshin radios are probably the best ones. They do have super heterodyne receivers. These sound the best, but they're not to the quality of, let's say, ICOM or Yaesu or Kenwood or somebody like that. Okay. And a lot of the common brands aren't very good. I'm not going to name any brands, but there are some well-known brands that make GMRS radios that I probably wouldn't buy. You got limited channels, right? You've only got 22 channels, so it can be congested. If you're in, let's say, a busy campground or near a city, all those channels might be used up, right? Because it shares those channels with FRS. That's both a pro and a con, because people buy those little bubble pack radios and they can use those no license. You might not be able to find a free channel. Okay, UHF isn't as good outdoors or in wooded and hilly areas compared to VHF. So let's say 2-meter ham generally works better than 70-centimeter ham does. So you might find that MERS, which operates VHF, might be better in the woods than GMRS is. Maybe. I haven't found a huge difference personally, but it is a real thing. Okay. It does require a license and a call sign. So this is something you're going to have to get a license for. Okay, so if you have an aversion to getting a license, this might not be for you. Repeater coverage can be spotty to non-existent in certain areas. So just because you can use repeaters on GMRS doesn't mean you will be able to. There are repeaters in my area. I can't hit any from my house. If I walk down the road about 1,000 feet that way, I can. Okay, but there are areas of the country where there are no GMRS repeaters at all. So that's something to keep in mind also. So who is GMRS for? Well, anybody who wants decent line-of-sight communications without breaking the bank or taking a test. Anybody who wants more range than an FRS radio will give you, and anyone who wants to be able to share their license with their family. All right. So I'll do a lot more GMRS content on the channel. I think GMRS is one of those areas where I think this would fit a lot of people's uses. All right. I think that a lot of people would find benefit from GMRS, even some of our ham radio folks. All right. Might find that GMRS has some uses. So like I said, for me, when I'm out in the woods with my family or out in my kayak with my family, I'm not taking a ham radio. I'm taking one of these guys, right? Because I can use that service with my entire family. So hopefully this was helpful as a primer to GMRS. I'll do some testing on some of these radios. We'll do some testing with some different antennas. We'll see how some of these things work. Okay, but I just wanted to give you kind of a basic overview of the general mobile radio service, what it was all about, and some of the things you might want to consider. So with that being said, if you have any questions, go ahead and leave those in the comment section below. Like I said, I will link this document in the video description, and I will try to put links to some of these things in the video description as well. Like I said, if you have any questions or concerns or comments or anything, feel free to leave them below. I'm tripping over my tongue again. And as always, until next time, 7-3.